Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all fandoms, welcome to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 127. I am the Angry Raccoon, your only host for this podcast, and bringing you the first podcast of 2019. And boy, did October just fly by for the most part. It's actually quite saddening to some extent that it's already over. You know, people already thinking about Christmas, already thinking about the end of this year, and yet I managed to watch so little Halloween horror-related stuff. It's a bit of a shame, but what can you do? I mean, at least it's getting colder, and I much prefer the cold as opposed to the heat for the most part. But yeah, bringing you a fairly small podcast. I think what I did over the last 2 weeks is a little bit more eventful than some of the trailers that actually came out, because there's a whole bunch of crap that they're advertising for, and I don't really feel like promoting the rubbish and the garbage of some of these trailers, film trailers, news stories, and other kinds of stuff that happened over the last 2 weeks or since the last podcast. So I guess we'll get straight into the things that I mainly watched over the last 2 weeks, which almost everything was horror related for the most part. The first film I watched was a film that I've basically had sitting on my desk for a while. It's a film that Ace from the podcast lent me, and I finally managed to watch it just before I met up with him a few days ago, and that is going to be LA Confidential, which is a pretty damn fantastic film, essentially following the crime wave and the way the police force worked during Los Angeles or LA during the 1960s, and it's a very fascinating and interesting film which I highly would recommend. I don't really want to go too much into the plot of the film, but it essentially revolves around LA's police department essentially trying to clean up the crime and kind of paint this very unrealistic image of how LA is like this perfect state, which is pretty interesting to see how the police force works and how they would essentially frame people and kind of like, you know, there's a few examples of the kind of illegal and dirty stuff they did, and it's a bit of a shame that some of that stuff is still happening even to this day. But fantastically performed and acted film throughout the most part. I don't want to spoil the whole cast and everything that happened in this film, but it's definitely a very interesting and great film. If you're really interested in crime thrillers and I guess films that follow police officers and justice and corruption and crime and that kind of stuff, it's definitely a must-watch film. Such a fantastically written film as well, and acted and performed. It's very interesting. I'd highly recommend that film. Next film I want to talk about is actually a TV show, which I have kind of been teasing the fact that I've been watching, and it finally just wrapped up literally on the 31st of October, which was quite fitting, and that was 2019's Creepshow TV adaptation, although technically as of now it has been confirmed for a second season. So it's actually Creepshow season 1. Really pleased they got a second season. Creepshow in itself was a series I really loved. I'm talking about this series that just aired. Really fun, very much of a mixed bag, but I would not say, compared to some of anthologies or anthology TV series, there wasn't a short that I felt like the people making it didn't care. Yes, there were weaker shorts, which I really didn't like, but nothing really got on my nerves for the most part. It was a very enjoyable, retro, campy, horror anthology series with a lot of charm to it, which I absolutely loved. There were some standout things in it. It was definitely a lower budgeted series. I don't think they were really going for anything like massive or epic to some extent, but it was nice to see some of the ideas and shorts. I think if you are going to go into Creepshow 2019, the first short is very weak, unfortunately. It's quite possibly one of the weakest and most confusing episodes. It kind of just ends extremely abruptly, and it's really not a great start. I would highly recommend keep going even if you don't like that episode, but there are some great episodes and some great concepts that I really liked in this series. Like, for example, I'm not going to say what happens in all these episodes, but I give you the rough name of some of them. Like, for example, I think it's Bad Wolf Down. I know there was The Head of the House, which is pretty good, and especially the last two episodes of episode 6, which was directed by someone who has a lot of history with the Creepshow series, and I won't spoil who it is, but their episode was pretty good. Very good series. I cannot wait for the second season. I cannot wait for a DVD release, so I would highly recommend that series. The next series I want to talk about is very much in the same vein as, I guess, an anthology, but it's trying to go a little bit more for a realistic dramatization of paranormal activities to some extent, and that is going to be True Horror. This is a 4-episode series that essentially tries to recreate what these people, or certain people, have essentially experienced in terms of like hauntings and horror and paranormal activities, done in a way where they essentially have the real life people essentially interviewed and kind of tell the story as the dramatization is going on, which kind of adds to the believability of it. And I should specify, in terms of like paranormal stuff, I'm not necessarily a skeptic. I just simply don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I very much will listen to it for the most part. I'm not about to tell someone that they didn't see a ghost, to, I guess, put in a better context. But it was very interesting the way they did the stuff. The biggest downfall of the series was definitely the intense use of jump scares. Now, I understand that the way in which people say how they saw ghosts is very much like a jump scare. I get that. But there are a lot of instances in which it's presented that the noise, the artificial noise that's added into, I guess, a ghost appearing is only a noise that we are hearing, which doesn't make much sense. The way in which this ghost or this entity or this spirit is essentially confronting a person is very odd. I don't really understand why a ghost would do it in that manner of ways. I mean, I understand it's a ghost that has no rhyme or reason, but it just felt like, oh, we got to be scary. I'd rather them be a little bit more accurate and chilling as opposed to trying to scare the actual audience. The story that these people are telling itself should be what's the scariest part of it, not necessarily loud noises. But there were some pretty creepy accounts of things. I think there's like one key visual in almost every episode in which it kind of did get to you. I mean, the first episode was definitely a very kind of like, well, I think almost every episode was very upsetting to some extent, because you see these people telling their story, and whether they're telling the truth, whether it's accurate, who knows? I'm not here to judge what they believe they saw. That's not what I want to do. It can be quite heartbreaking at some points, because although some of the stories do have a somewhat happy ending, what these people experienced that went through is, quite traumatic for the most part. The first episode essentially follows a haunted, I guess, farmhouse where some really horrible things start happening. The second episode, which by far was one of the most interesting episodes, essentially follows a supposed, well, what's interesting about it is they believe, see, I'm struggling to figure out how you put it, because the problem is, even with the episode, the intent of the threat isn't clear, and the whole family disagrees on the intent of the threat. Some say it's a friendly ghost, some say it's a pretty evil ghost for the most part. It's bizarre, but I found that very interesting. And a few the other two episodes, which are fine, essentially following kind of like a haunted graveyard to some extent, and a witch's prison. So interesting topics. If you're interested in that, I'd definitely give it a watch. It was a fine watch for the most part. And the last film I want to talk about, kind of staying with anthologies, is a film I've been looking forward to for a really long time, just haven't got around to watching it for the most part, and that's Trick or Treat. This is the same film directed by the director, I completely forget his name, who did Krampus and then later went on to do Godzilla versus... No, not Godzilla versus King Kong. The new Godzilla film, which was garbage. He did that film, unfortunately. Really, really strong film. I absolutely love this film. It's an anthology film that essentially manages to intertwine all the stories and all the characters into one consecutive flow. So it doesn't necessarily feel like 4 short films. It feels like a film that constantly flip-flops between characters. So it feels whole in a sense. And it was fantastic the way in which it was done and kind of structured, because the way the film begins isn't necessarily the beginning of the story, not to spoil much, but it's nice that you kind of get to piece the pieces back together, and you realize that, oh, the characters that are in this story kind of bump into this character, and this has relevance on this, which was really well done. You kind of basically flop from story A to B to C to D, with a few of them kind of, coming into one another, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. The practical effects and the way everything played out was pretty good as well. It's definitely a film that is all about the spirit and honoring Halloween in the best way. I've seen a lot of, I guess, scarier things that, essentially set themselves on Halloween night, and compared to this, they kind of don't feel as important or as epic as this film. And I mean, the one bow that kind of keeps everything together is, I guess, the main star of the film, which is Sam. Now, if you haven't seen Sam is essentially this kid in like pajamas with a sack over his head with buttons for eyes. I believe that's what he's called, Sam. And I won't say what Sam is, but he is a very interesting and great kind of character within the spirit of Halloween or October. But absolutely love this film. I would highly recommend it. I'm definitely going to watch this film next Halloween, because I think it is by far one of the most appropriate films to watch on the day. And that pretty much wraps up all the things I did over the last few weeks. Let's move on to our news stories and topics for the most part. Was originally going to talk about Blizzard and its Blizzard convention, but given that nothing really came out of that and it was just a bunch of BS, I'm not going to bother with that. So let's move on to our first trailer, which kind of is a bit of BS as well, given what they're trying to do, and that's going to be the trailer for Bloodshot, which is Sony being pretty stupid once again. And yeah, this is essentially a film that follows Vin Diesel, who is essentially some kind of cyborg, dead super agent man, and he essentially gets brought back, and he's like the Terminator now, where he can heal himself with nanomachines and his blood cells, and it's just really generic at the end of the day. And it's basically what the RoboCop from 2014 remake was trying to do, and it essentially feels like a more lamer upgrade which came out last year, I believe. It kind of seems to take both elements of that and just do it completely, pointlessly to some extent. And I mean, I've seen this story before, the whole, you're our killing machine, and, we control you, and no, you don't control me, I'm going to show you, I'm going to take down your whole organization. Very much like the plot of Gemini Man and so many other films you've probably seen, like the Bourne Identity films, and, the aforementioned two films I just mentioned, like RoboCop and Upgrade. So it's a very generic and very stupid film. It's very much going to be a innocent, I guess, crowd pleaser. It doesn't seem like I've seen worse films where they actually seem like they could actually be damaging people's intelligence. This was like dumb fun. Apparently it's based on a comic. I do not know how accurate the comic is to the film, and frankly I do not care, because this film looks like trash. But the two things I did think were interesting was some of the visual designs I thought were quite unique. The way in which Vin Diesel kind of repairs himself or heals, I thought was kind of interesting. I did like the way it looked on his hand. It kind of looked, the way it was kind of like literally stitching him back together. The presentation of that was kind of interesting, as well as I think when he gets like shot in the face and it kind of takes off part of his skin, exposing his like gums. It was interesting how the skin or whatever kind of just stayed there. It was kind of like suspended in motion, almost like time had stopped. And I thought that was a very interesting visual. It was very weird, which I really liked. And Man with Robot Arms. I really liked him, not for his character, but just because it reminded me very much of a boss in a video game, which is probably why he's even there, just to be like the boss or the rival, or another one of the countless characters going, "Oh, did you realize you were part of the system, the brain controlling," because I'm pretty sure so many characters in this film or this trailer literally say, "You don't know what's real, you don't know what's real," and all that kind of rubbish. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really care for this film. I thought it was just a noteworthy interest, And yeah, I probably won't watch this film, and this film will probably be forgotten about. And when people listen to this podcast 5 years later, they'll be like, oh, I've never heard of this film, despite the fact they'd watched it. Oh dear. Oh, excuse me, that's my chair making noise. Let's move on to our next trailer, kind of going more into horror, I guess, to some extent, although it's a bit ambiguous for the most part what the actual intent of this film is, and that's going to be Little Joe, which is kind of surprising that they're playing straight with this one for the most part. I mean, I would have gone for something a little bit more in tone of In Fabric, which came out earlier this year, in that it's essentially taking such a ridiculous premise like flowers being a threat and kind of having fun with it, you know, kind of making it scary but also kind of laughing at itself in the sense. I didn't really get this from the trailer for the most part, and it is a bit strange because the last time someone tried to make flowers a threat, we got The Happening, which, as we all know, was a pretty damn terrible and laughable film. So I'm wondering whether the same fate is going to befall this film. But I will be honest, I'm actually interested in what's going on in this film for the most part. I mean, it keeps its cards close to its chest. It doesn't really say or show too much. I mean, it seems like it might be a slightly more slower paced, creeping film, which I'm always down for the most part. But I mean, there are some nice elements in this film for the most part. Like, I do like how clean and bright everything is, and, you know, the environment of it being a laboratory or some kind of greenhouse, I think is a nice welcome change for the most part. And I did like some of the lighting that appeared in the film. I did like how the flowers, the emotion flowers, were always kind of highlighted with a purple light in order to, I guess, showcase how, like, strange they were, or their presence, or their control, or how unnatural they are to some extent. You know, there was stuff there which I really liked, and I think overall the vibe of this trailer I really like. That's why I wanted to include it in the podcast, because I feel like it could be an interesting film at the end of the day, and I think it's worth knowing about for the most part. That's why, you know, I'm talking about it for the most part. But yeah, this is one to watch for me. And I think it's interesting, although I am very worried that it's just going to be a bit of a mess. But we shall see. I've seen lesser films turn out to be good, but whatever. And moving on to our last trailer for the most part. I'm not rushing this podcast by any means. It's just there isn't that much to talk about, and there isn't really too much to say. I'm not going to write an essay on a film or a trailer that I know very little about. Last trailer we have is for Midnight Family, which is such an interesting focus for a documentary that you just know is going to be so tense and so emotional, as it essentially focuses on this family in Mexico who essentially, I'm guessing, has an ambulance or kind of maybe runs some kind of clinic, very much independently based, and they're essentially prowling the night hoping that they get a call so they can go pick up someone and help them and hopefully get paid. Which is an interesting concept because it doesn't look like a documentary at all. It looks more or less like a dramatization film, and it's interesting in the way in which it's presenting issues within like Mexico as well as other countries around the world, addressing like healthcare or lack of healthcare and struggling families with money. And it's nice, a good way in which they kind of showcase that is when you literally see the family racing another ambulance car to get to this injured person, which is an interesting concept, but it's also a really messed up and desperate situation to think that, this other ambulance might be in exactly the same position as this family, that there's competition between trying to save a life, although it's not really about saving a life, it's about making money or just trying to survive. It's really messed up, and I mean, there were a few lines or a few things that alluded to it, but I think there was a point where someone said how they saved some guy's life, but he had no health insurance, he had no money, so it was almost like back to square one. That was pointless. So that was really interesting, and I really liked, that kind of aspect and that kind of angle. And I do like how this film isn't like preachy at all. It's very much show don't tell, and it does seem like a film that's very much going to be like, just roll the cameras, capture this, you know what I mean? Which I do like. It will help the film's believability and I guess really showcase the sadness and once again the struggle of what these people and possibly what the country and many other people around the world are going through. So it's really nice that a film has kind of been composed in such a mature and interesting way, which is why it really captured my interest for the most part. It's very well shot as well. I do like how they really are kind of capturing that nighttime vibe and the very blinding ambient lights. It's all very interesting. It definitely seems like it's going to be a really tense and interesting film. I know a lot of people, the moment Mexico gets mentioned, obviously so much hate is getting thrown to it. That's not me. That's not why I'm talking about this podcast. I'm talking about this podcast purely based on artistry and what this film may and does stand for. So I'm interested in that film. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up this podcast. The podcasts are short because there's very little to talk about and there isn't 2 to 3 of us on this podcast. Other people have lives very much like me. And I do have discussions lined up. It's just I can't really do a discussion with just one person, and I know that it'll be a bit late if I'm making a discussion and then people are emailing me in later on, which if you do want to email me, raccoonplusfriends@gmail.com. If you have any questions or any thoughts and opinions on anything we've talked about in this podcast, let me know. I would love to hear from you. Ultimately, you can also leave a comment in the YouTube link comment section, as well as hitting me up on Twitter. That's Raccoon Angry. Simply put, only one C in the raccoon. All of that will be in the description and download link. And what else is going to be in the download link is going to be the video of the episode. Now, because it is November, and usually in November we like to remember, the videos of the episode are going to be taken from the past. And as soon as it's just me, I'm picking the first video of the episode back from the past. And that is going to be Mr. Oizo with Flat Beat. Now, this is a very interesting music video and song, and as well as artist. If you haven't seen the music video, you'll understand what I mean. But the significance of this music video, it has a lot of significance in history. First and foremost, it is essentially over 20 years old, this song exactly. It first released back in 1991 on the 22nd of March. And if I remember correctly, I don't know about other countries, I believe it got to number 1 on the UK charts. Now, when you hear the song, you're definitely going to be wondering, like, how the hell did this song get to number 1? Because it's very repetitive, it's very silly, and it's very generic to some extent, but that's the masterful craft of Mr. Oizo. He essentially makes music that's both good and very silly and kind of abstract and very odd. A lot of his music sounds bad but good, but not in a so bad it's good, I can enjoy this way. There's actual artistry to how he makes music. And this is it. I mean, you'll hear the song and literally within like 20 seconds, you'll understand why it's called Flat Beat and why it loops. And of course, I cannot mention Mr. Oizo without mentioning Flat Eric, who is essentially the star of this music video, and a lot of Mr. Oizo's, imagery. So hopefully you'll enjoy this song. Let me know if you have already or never seen this music video, and let me know what you think exactly. I would love to know if with especially younger audiences, whether this song and even this music video holds up. I would love to know that. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be the podcast for the most part. I have some fun discussions lined up for the rest of the year. Hopefully I get some guests to talk about them with. But other than that, I guess I'll end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.